Welcome to Sightseeing Japan, the podcast where we explore the land of many stories. I'm Paul Bresson.
And I'm Jason Nealing. And today we're going to tell many, many stories. I feel like this is going to be a long one, Paul. I could not help myself with these notes.
I tried to take the most basic major themes to outline, and I ended up with 18 pages of notes. I was like, oh my goodness.
I don't even remember the last time I had this many notes, but
pretty sure I never have.
But hey, this is a special episode. Not only is it the last episode of season 6, it's also our 150th episode. That's a big deal. I feel like we should have a cake here or something.
Yeah. What incredible milestone. I did want to take a moment to reminisce a little bit with you, Jason. I sat there and I thought about the podcast going back. I don't even know. What are we at? 6
years?
6 some years or
That's
something like
crazy.
that. 150 episodes. When we started the podcast, I had been to Japan twice. I've now been to Japan 4 times with a 5th incoming here in the next 6 months or so.
Yeah.
We've got to meet listeners
a
bunch of different times. We've met some local listeners. We've done meetups. We've done sub meetups of meetups.
If you had told me when we were recording our very first episode that we would eventually have a series of podcast meetups and we'd meet people from around the world, I would have slapped you and called you a liar. But it's happening. That's what we're doing now.
Right. I'm surprised even more by the people wanting to meet us than the people listening to us. People want to meet us?
Yeah, we're not that interesting. What's up with that?
I don't know. You're pretty cool, Jason.
No. Everybody's coming for you. I know it.
We've done so much research. I've discovered endless destinations that I want to go explore in Japan.
Dude, it's crazy to think about how much I've learned just from doing the podcast.
Right, like I said, I've been to Japan twice now since we started the podcast. Even if you include all the things we're going to see in this upcoming trip, my list is bigger than it was when we started.
Yeah.
We just keep adding things to the list. And then there's things I want to go back and see again now that I have better context and understanding of what I was looking at.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. I remember when we first started and I was kind of telling people about the concept of the podcast, and sometimes people would be like, how long do you think you can do that? How much is there to talk about? And even still, I don't see an end in sight. There's still so much to talk about. We have such a huge list of potential topic ideas still.
Yeah, I've heard that too. Aren't you guys done with Japan yet? Not even close.
Yeah, it's funny.
I think the best thing about the podcast, though, is that at least once a month, I get to come hang out with you and do podcast stuff.
Oh, Paul. You're making me blush.
Remember we were roommates when we started this? How long ago does that feel? We've both lived 3 or 4 different places since then,
Man, I guess. Yeah, man. It's been really fun. And I look forward to doing this for a lot longer, too. Let's keep this going. What do you say?
Yeah. I mean, we got at least another 150 ideas for episodes, so we got a long ways to go.
Yeah. Well, should we take this opportunity to talk about our next trip for a second?
Sure.
Just want to make sure, since this is going to be our last episode for a little while before we start the next season, I want to make sure that anyone who is planning a trip to Japan for February is aware that we're doing our podcast meetup in Sapporo on February 7th at 6 p.m. That's February 7th, 2026.
Yes, good note there.
And it's going to be really fun. Our concept for this trip is that we're going to hit up as many winter festivals as we can. So we're spending a lot of time in Hokkaido and Tohoku, northern Honshu.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be real fun.
Yeah, it's going to be great.
So we'll have more information coming about the details of the meetup and where exactly to find us. We're thinking about a place called Barefoot Bar at the moment, but we'll let you know when we finalize it. Just wanted to give you a heads up if you are going to be in the area. It'd be really cool to meet up. Well, anyway, for today, we didn't really say exactly what the topic was, did we?
No, it's just the entire history of Japan.
Yeah, the whole thing, all of it.
In one episode.
To end. Yeah, it's a it's a challenging one. There's just so much to fit in, but we've come at the history stuff from so many different perspectives in all these different episodes, about different topics or different parts of the country. So we wanted to try to tie it all together here and just give you one timeline and give you a sense of what was going on in Japan throughout the centuries. So
I did a little math when I was taking my notes, and I came to, we're going to need to be around 5 minutes per period here, or era here, to keep it under 2 hours.
2 hours? 5 minutes per period for 2 hours?
Including intro and music and outro.
We're not going to
We're definitely going to be under 2 hours if we hit 5 or less.
I don't know.
But these early ones, I think we could power through a little bit quicker, because some of the later ones are definitely going to be longer.
Okay, well, I already have like a half page for the intro right here. I threw caution to the wind because it's such a big milestone episode. It's like I don't care if we go a little bit over.
Yeah.
And I just kept finding interesting stuff I wanted to make sure to include. So listeners might remember hearing us talking about all these different periods, right? The Edo Period, the Warring States Period, the Meiji Period, the Heian Period, the Kamakura Period. So many periods. And it occurred to me, where did these periods get their names? You ever wonder about that?
Yes. That's one of the first things I usually look up when I'm looking at a new period.
Like where the name came from?
Yeah.
Okay. So then maybe you already know a bunch of this stuff that I have written down here.
Oh, you have them all now?
I mean, I'm just going to talk. I know. Okay. I'm not going to talk about how each one was named.
Okay.
I'm just going to talk about the naming convention as a whole.
Oh, I didn't know there was a rhyme or reason. It seemed kind of random to me.
Oh, it's crazy and complicated and weird, and it changed over time. But I tried to condense it into something that's not crazy, confusing, and long. Okay. So these days, currently, right now, we're in the Reiwa period, right?
Yeah.
Do you know where that name came from?
I mean, it's the reign title of the current emperor or whatever.
Right, but where does the name
I don't know.
Who decides
I
on it?
don't know where they get that.
So these days, each modern era is named by the cabinet when there's a new emperor. And it's been that way ever since 1868, which you may recognize as the date of the Meiji Restoration. At that point, they switched to this system where the cabinet, whenever there's a new emperor, they get together and they decide, okay, here's what we're going to name this era. But then when that emperor dies, he basically assumes the name of the period in which he reigned. So, for example, we would say now that the emperor in the Showa period was Emperor Showa, or Showa Tenno, but when he was alive, he was known as Hirohito, right?
Yep.
And right now, as I said, we're in the Reiwa period, and the emperor is Naruhito, but after he dies, he'll be known as Emperor Reiwa, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's how it works now. But before 1868, we're talking about the Edo period and the Heian period and stuff. Those names weren't decided in the same way at all. There were actually different era naming systems that were used over the centuries. Generally, it was court officials who decided on era names, but they changed all the time. They didn't line up with the reign of specific emperors. There could have actually been several eras within a single emperor's reign. It's like they just decided randomly, oh, we're in a new era now, we're going to call it this. But the names like the Edo period, the Heian period, the Nara period, those aren't even the names that I'm talking about at this point. Those names were assigned by historians. Nobody called them that when they were happening, right?
Yeah, that's generally how history works.
Yeah.
Going to the Roman Empire was we're living in the classical period.
Right. So historians are looking back and they're dividing up these periods based on shifts in political power and social structure. But at the same time, there were official periods that, the people back then would have called them. Am I just getting really confusing? Is this making sense? Basically, these historical eras we talk about before 1868 are kind of mostly unofficial eras.
Right. History's not so neat that, these 300 years were this. It's an artificial divide.
Yeah.
And it's not a clean cut between whatever divided the period and what came after.
Right. But there were also official eras happening at that time that, whoever was in power decided on.
Right.
So if you go look it up, you'll find that inside the Heian period, there were a bunch of
Right.
named eras,
But
we just don't call it that anymore.
They're too quick. Like
Yeah.
there'd be 1,000 of them or whatever. Like we
Right.
can't handle that in our brains.
Right. So since we're talking about these historical, unofficial eras, like among historians, there's always debate over like when exactly a new period started and when it ended, and because it's all kind of made up based on, whatever they think is the most important historical event.
Indeed.
Was that useful, Paul? I guess to sum that all up, the names came from all sorts of different places and they refer to different time periods that are designated in different ways. So maybe you should just forget everything I just said. How's that?
Sure. But that's where we're going to be sorting out, because we're going to be going through each period and telling you what happened and what's going on.
Yeah. So we're going to try to divide it up, list out these periods, and the periods we're talking about are those historical ones that historians usually talk about when they're looking back throughout Japanese history.
Yeah. So I guess my note before we get going here is, there's so much in history. I tried to focus kind of narrowly on like who's in power, the struggle between the imperial family versus the shoguns and the daimyos and the back and forth and the clans taking power, but also cultural notes kind of from each era too, and what developed and what carries on to today. Like. Yeah, so try to add key events, natural disasters maybe that happened, things that really affected the country.
Yeah, the big stuff, the national level stuff.
Yeah. We're going to talk about like, there would be some wars here that we probably give 1 or 2 sentences to that you could do a whole hours of content on.
I mean, yeah, like you could expand on every single word that we're going to say, I was going to say you could do a whole podcast that is this episode expanded into a whole podcast, and that's been done. There's a History of Japan podcast.
Yes. Well, should we just get into it?
Let's do it, Paul. The Big Bang. What do you got?
I got the Paleolithic Period.
No, Big Bang.
Okay, the Big Bang happened. Matter scattered throughout the universe and slowly coalesced into stars, and then
you got
planets
Japan.
and solar systems, and then volcanoes rose and created the archipelago of Japan.
Okay, Japan.
And that leaves us to about 40,000 years ago in the Paleolithic Period, which, as far as we know, is about the time that humans arrived in Japan for the first time. They very likely arrived by sea, as there were not believed to be any land bridges at the time connecting Japan.
And they were hunter-gatherers. That was their lifestyle at the time. They were hunting.
Yeah.
They were also gathering. That's where that name comes from.
At the time, there were even elephants and giant deer that roamed Japan that they hunted.
I thought that was crazy, man. These pictures of these massive deer.
Yeah.
It's like a moose-sized deer.
Yep.
I saw that they could get up to 1,000 pounds. Imagine a 1,000-pound deer. It's crazy.
I imagine a moose.
Dude, I just love imagining Earth with all these enormous animals that are now extinct. Like, it just would have been like a completely different planet. It's insane to think about.
Like the giant sloths. That's the one that gets me. Like a 15-foot tall sloth. Like, what? That would blow my mind. Dude.
Oh, man. Yeah.
But the humans, as we are so incredibly adaptable. There's evidence of human habitation on Okinawa 32,000 years ago.
It's crazy.
Like, Okinawa's a ways out there from any mainland.
Yeah, little islands. So, the Paleolithic period ended around 13,000 BC. There's some debate on exactly when that transition happened. Some people would say maybe it was 14,000 BC. But after the Paleolithic era comes the Jomon Period. This is the period where pottery was created, and the period is actually named after that pottery. Jomon means cord-marked, because the pots that they made in that period, they have patterns on them from ropes that they wrapped around the pots.
Yeah, and this is possibly the first time that pottery was invented in the entire world.
Cool.
And it's also one of the only times in history that a non-agrarian society developed pottery. It's always been farmers making pots, except for Japan.
Interesting. Yeah, I saw that in this period, people were still mostly hunter-gatherers, but maybe because of the pottery, they started to create more permanent settlements with pit dwellings, and they became less nomadic. Like, once you have these pots and you can store things, you can store food and start to preserve food, you don't need to be wandering around to wherever the food is, right?
Interesting. I was thinking the other way around. Japan was incredibly abundant for hunter-gatherers. The population density of hunter-gatherers in Japan was much higher than it is in a lot of the rest of the world. So life was a little bit easier for them, which led maybe to more sedentary life and less moving, which maybe gave them the chance to develop something like pottery.
Okay.
And be able to save all the excess abundant resources that they had.
Interesting. Yeah.
But we'll probably never know, right?
Yeah. One of those things. It was just so long ago. But yeah, the pottery, I never really thought about it before, but it's kind of crazy how much that would have affected the lifestyle, because all of a sudden you could boil food. And like I said, store food. So it apparently had a huge change on their diet as well.
Yeah. And the Jomon people were quite likely the same people that had already lived in Japan for all that time, and they were developing new technologies. But there could have been new waves of immigrants too. I think that's a little bit unclear because ancient bones don't preserve very well in Japan due to soil conditions. So we don't have a lot of DNA evidence of exactly who was who at that time.
Okay. So the Jomon period lasted until around 300 BC, when it transitioned into what's called the Yayoi period. And this period is named after the Yayoi people who came to Japan from mainland Asia, probably through Korea. And with them came some really big changes, like the production of metal tools and the cultivation of rice. This is also when weaving and silk production were introduced.
Mm-hmm. I believe they brought glass-making technology with them as well.
Fancy.
The population of the Yayoi people began to grow in northern Kyushu, and they began to expand and displace and somewhat absorb the Jomon people as they did so.
Yeah, Japan's population really exploded in this period, and society started to become more hierarchical. This is actually the period when the first Japanese kingdoms started forming.
Yeah, there was a book from China published in 111 AD that stated that Japan was comprised of many different kingdoms.
So I don't think I noticed this when I was taking my notes, but there's a little bit of overlap here in the years. And like we said, historians don't always agree on exactly when a certain period ended and when a new one began. But from what I saw, the Yayoi period goes to 300 CE or AD, however you want to say it. But then the Kofun period, that started in 250. Is that what you have, Paul?
Yes. There's a lot of overlap in this early era, but I kind of get it because, the Yayoi are talking about these farm villages growing into little kingdoms, and that happened over a certain span. And now when we talk about the Kofun period, we're talking about the tombs that got built.
Right.
And that started happening at this time and went through a certain time. So there is some overlap there.
Well, it's also interesting how when you're looking at these era names, like sometimes historians talk about a certain era because it refers to a specific part of the history. Like the Kofun period is talking specifically about these burial mounds, and we'll get into that in a second. But then there's the Yamato period, which overlaps a lot with that because that's more looking at political developments rather than like the existence of these mounds. Yeah, so the Kofun period, the years for that would be 250 CE to 538 CE. So, Paul, what's up with the burial mounds?
I think it was just went hand in hand with the rising stratification of society and the growth of kingdoms, is that powerful people in Japan presumably started having really large burial mounds built for them. Some of them were up to almost 500 meters long.
Yeah, they're crazy big. And you can still see some of these. You can still visit them, which is crazy.
They're kind of all over the place. They're just like man-made hills. A lot of them were keyhole shaped. Yeah. Which is really interesting to me. Like, where did that shape come from and what does it mean? I don't think anybody knows.
Mm-hmm.
I also found that they were often filled with mini clay sculptures, often of warriors or horses, maybe indicating that there was a warrior culture emerging even at this time.
Cool. So next up, the Yamato period, 250 CE to 710 CE. And as I said, the Kofun period is the beginning of this period, really. But the Kofun designation is focusing more on the culture and archaeology. But at the same time that those burial mounds were being made for regional rulers, a central government was starting to emerge in Yamato province, which is around modern Nara. So when we're talking about the Yamato period, it's more focusing on that, what's going on with the politics around Nara.
The central state expanded with military conquests, but they were also really shrewd in political dealings and bringing people into the fold by giving them cushy appointments and posts in the government. So they expanded not only with violence, but also with statecraft.
Cool. Near the end of the Yamato period is when Japan's first imperial court was established. And supposedly you can even draw a direct hereditary line between the Yamato rulers and the emperors of today. That's the claim. It's widely considered to be the longest lasting dynasty in human history.
Yeah?
The whole world.
I mean,
whole
that's
species.
What are we talking about? Over 1,500 years here? That's a long time for an imperial line to hold out.
Yep.
Next up, we're moving a little bit into the more classical era of Japan, is what kind of these next few periods are called. The first of these classical periods is the Asuka Period, beginning in 538 CE. I think I said 80 earlier, then you started using CE.
Oh,
so we could use CE, Common Era.
They mean the same thing. It's just the AD, is kind of looking at it from a religious perspective.
Right. Which I get, but it's also like they didn't change the date at all, so it's still based on that arbitrary date, which does have religious connotations. So I'm kind of like, yeah, whatever.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
I don't know.
Anyways, the period draws its name from the fact that the imperial capital was in Asuka at the time, which is also in that Nara region, a little bit south of modern-day Nara. And this is also when Buddhism was introduced in Japan, right at the start of this period.
Yeah, that was, hugely influential, obviously. That contributed to the development of the arts and architecture. It introduced the first written language to Japan from China. The oldest temples in Japan that you can still visit were built around this time. I also wanted to point out that the Asuka period overlaps with the Yamato period. Basically, you could look at it as the Yamato period contains the Kofun period and the Asuka period. They're almost like subdivisions of the Yamato period.
Sure.
I don't know, yeah.
This period also saw the rise of the Soga clan. Their influence grew and grew, and they became very powerful and almost de facto leaders of Japan in the late 500s. I also saw this is where the name of Japan originated. There's a story that someone from the Soga clan sent a letter to the Emperor of China, and he started the letter with the ruler of the land of the rising sun addresses the ruler of the land of the setting sun. So that was the first kind of mention in history of the land of the rising sun, which became Nippon, which is still called to this day.
Wow. That's a good note.
Yeah.
Didn't know that.
Also, a little bit later in this era was the beginning of the Fujiwara clan, which would become a very powerful clan.
Oh, yeah, they'll come up again.
Yes. It was actually the founder of the Fujiwara clan and an imperial prince ended up kind of ousting the Soga from power. And they began trying to coalesce imperial power.
After the Asuka period, in the year 710, we have the Nara period. I feel like this is where we're getting to like the meat of Japanese history, because people talk about Nara as the ancient capital of Japan. It was the first permanent capital of Japan. That's why we call it the Nara period. At the time, though, it was called Heijo-kyo, the city was. And before this point, the capital moved around whenever an emperor died. And I remember we've said that a bunch of times in other episodes, Paul, but I didn't realize exactly why that was. Did you know that there was an ancient belief that the place of death of the emperor was polluted. That's why they had to move it somewhere else.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So in the Yamato period, previously, there had initially been some resistance to Buddhism when it first started coming in, because it was a new and foreign religion. But in the Nara period, while commoners still would have considered themselves practitioners of Shinto, the native religion of Japan, these upper classes, the people in charge, they were all about Buddhism, and they were very welcoming of the Chinese influence at this point. So, for example, the Chinese language, like I said, that came in with Buddhism, and that was gradually being modified into a uniquely Japanese language. So that spawned the first Japanese written poetry. It also produced these two historical/political/mythological texts that we've talked about before, the Kojiki and the Nihon Shoki. Those are kind of Japan's first attempts at recording their history in written form.
Yeah, so we actually have history from these periods that survives to today.
Yeah.
So that's a huge change. Also, help pushing Buddhism forward, there was a massive smallpox epidemic from 735 to 737 that killed over a quarter of the population of Japan.
Jeez.
And the emperor at the time thought perhaps he wasn't being pious enough, so he really leaned heavily into Buddhism, and that supposedly would help spur the construction of Todaiji Temple in Nara.
Wow. After the Nara period in 794, we're transitioning into the Heian period, and I have a whole bunch of notes about this one, Paul. I could not help myself. A lot of interesting stuff happened here. So in 794, Japan's capital was moved from Nara, which was known as Heijō-kyo, to Kyoto, which was then known as Heian-kyo. So that's where the period got its name, Heian-kyo, Heian period. This is the height of the Japanese imperial court. So you had all these aristocratic families hanging around, and these really important families, they started to actually rival the emperor in power and influence. And eventually, one of those families, the Fujiwara, you may remember that from a few minutes ago, they figured out how to rise above the rest of these aristocratic families by tying themselves into the imperial line, basically. They're like, okay, how can we take control when the emperor is clearly the main dude? You know, everybody's looking at the emperor. Oh, wait a minute, what if we take our daughters and marry them off to imperial heirs? Then we can twist our family in with the imperial family. And then what they did to grab even more power was that let them act as regents for child emperors. So the emperor would die, and then there's this little kid emperor, and it's like, well, he can't run the country. So I guess the Fujiwaras, the in-laws, they need to, take care of things until the emperor is old enough.
Yep.
Pretty sneaky. So the Fujiwaras became extremely influential. They're one of those really important legendary clans in Japanese history. As Paul mentioned, they go even further back than this. Throughout the rest of Japanese history, they were used as a way to legitimize other rulers' claims to power. It's like, well, we're related to the Fujiwaras, and they go all the way back to the very beginning. So,
yeah, and to me, this kind of feels like the beginnings of what would become the shoguns later, because these titles started appearing. In 858, Fujiwara no Yoshifusa was declared Sessho, or regent for the underage emperor, like you said. But then it didn't even go very far. Just his son, the next Fujiwara heir, became a Kampaku, which could rule in the place of an adult emperor. They went from regent to we're just ruling for you in one generation.
Wow. It's pretty brazen, but it worked, I guess.
They had enough power, apparently.
Yeah. So that's what was going on politically, but at the same time, there were a lot of cultural developments as well in art and literature centered around the court. All the important stuff in Japan is pretty much happening around the imperial court, right? If you've heard of the Tale of Genji, written by Lady Murasaki Shikibu, arguably the single most famous piece of Japanese literature, also considered the first novel ever written in the whole world, that was written in the Heian period.
Chinese influence waned a little bit too, leading to the rise of more Japanese-specific art and art styles.
There was also a lot going on in the world of Buddhism. There were new sects popping up like Shingon Buddhism, Tendai Buddhism, Pure Land Buddhism. All these were kind of gaining popularity. And then toward the end of this period, by the way, this period ends in 1185, and towards the end of that is when these two other powerful clans rose to prominence, the Taira and the Minamoto. We've talked about them before. They fought the Genpei War, basically a civil war because they each backed rival claimants to the throne.
Yeah, it seemed like this entire period was kind of like the imperial court spinning further out of relevance or reality. They got so tied up in their internal politics and the culture and everything that they started losing real control and power throughout the country. And that's what gave rise to these powerful clans being able to field their own armies and kind of really dominate the day.
So that Genpei War that I mentioned, that civil war, the Minamoto ended up winning that. And that's what leads us into the next period, the Kamakura Period.
Yeah.
So the Kamakura Period is 1185 to 1333. And this is when Japan saw its first shogunate. After the Minamotos won the Genpei War, Minamoto no Yoritomo established that first shogunate. He set up his headquarters in the city of Kamakura. That's where this period gets its name. It's also where the shogunate got its name, the Kamakura shogunate.
Mm-hmm.
Paul, do we want to lay out quickly what a shogunate is, how it works, how the political landscape was structured at that time?
Yeah. So the shogunate was a military government. They called the bakufu, which I think was the tent government, going from their military tents. They controlled the real power, but the emperor and the imperial court was still there, and they held more of a ritual significance than actual political power. So they would do a lot of things, but the real decisions were happening with the shogun.
Yeah, the emperor basically just like sanctioned the shogunate and gave it its legitimacy, but he wasn't involved in, the running of the country. And this whole shogunate system basically laid the foundation for feudalism in Japan. If you've heard of feudal Japan, that's what we're talking about, the time of shogunates. And so the idea is there's the shogun, he's leading the country, and then there are the local lords or daimyo who report up to the shogun, and then those daimyos or lords have samurai who report up to them, and they're kind of the ones enforcing order around the country. So you could call this period the golden age of the samurai. Like this is when those samurai ideals of duty and loyalty and bravery developed, along with those practices like seppuku, the ritual suicide where people are cutting open their bellies.
So Yoritomo set up this new shogunate, and all's well and good. And then he dies in 1199, and power was seized by his wife and father-in-law of the Hojo clan. So they became the regents, and the Hojos held on to power then for the rest of this era.
Yeah, Yoritomo, his heir, was really young and inexperienced, so the Hojo were basically just immediately able to swoop in and be like, hey, we can advise you, this isn't a problem. And it's kind of a shame. After that whole big war, like Minamoto no Yoritomo did not survive for very long after creating this shogunate. And then immediately it's like, okay, now we have this regency taking control.
Yeah, I feel like the Minamoto and the Taira was this big deal. These two huge, powerful clans duking it out for control of Japan, and they get like one guy becomes shogun, and then some other clan like swoops in behind the scenes and seizes power without ever fighting a battle.
Yeah, and it was a really clever move what the Hojo did, and it kind of reminded me of how the Fujiwara clan gained their power centuries earlier. Right? It's just this time instead of acting as regent for the emperor, they're acting as regent for this new shogun.
Yeah.
This is kind of, I don't know, it's smart. Like, you don't need to be in the hot seat. You don't need to be the emperor or the shogun if you can find a way to run things from behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
And that happened over and over again in Japanese history, it feels like. This is also the period when Japan was invaded by Mongols twice. So if you've played the game, the video game, Ghost of Tsushima, This is the time period that takes place in. Mongols invaded in 1274 and 1281, but both times they failed because, of course, Japan was protected by the gods, the kami, and their kamikaze, right, Paul?
Yeah, the divine wind swooped in and created storms, destroying the Mongol fleet both times.
Yeah, that's what kamikaze means. It directly translates to, the wind of the gods, the divine wind. So that's kind of a fun fact, I think. But, of course, war is expensive. So after 2 wars defending Japan against the Mongols, the government was pretty weak after the invasions, and that's what led to the end of the Kamakura shogunate after Emperor Go-Daigo revolted. He's like, I'm sick of this shogunate thing. We're going back to imperial rule. So let's start the Muromachi period. That's a direct quote. That's what the emperor said.
Okay. The Muromachi period began in 1333 after Emperor Go-Daigo's rebellion, but he didn't manage to maintain power for very long, did he?
He just had a few years. His policies weren't all that popular, so he ended up being overthrown by Ashikaga Takauji, which is funny because he's actually the guy that helped Go-Daigo take power in the first place.
Yeah, he was the general sent to go put him down and ended up joining sides with him just to flip on him a couple years later and demand to be named shogun himself.
Yeah, that's crazy. I just wish I could have sat in on those conversations, He's like, Go-Daigo, this whole thing isn't working out the way I thought it would, so I'm just going to do it myself. You sit down and I'll take over the country. How about that?
So Emperor Go-Daigo refused to appoint Takauji as shogun, so they fought a war, and Takauji captured Kyoto, but the emperor fled, so Ashikaga found another member of the imperial family, named them emperor, and had them name him shogun, beginning the Ashikaga shogunate. And there was actually a period of decades where there were 2 courts, which eventually were reconciled back into one.
So the capital was still in Kyoto at this point, and this is when the Kitayama and Higashiyama cultures developed. We talked about that recently in our episode on the Golden and Silver Pavilions.
In 1467, the Onin War broke out over who would succeed the shogun, and daimyos from across the country took sides. Kyoto was absolutely burned to the ground in the fighting, and by the time it was settled in 1477, the shogun had basically lost all control over the daimyo. And this led to the beginning of what's known as the Warring States period, as all the daimyos basically kind of ran their own little countries and fought with each other over influence and control of the country.
Yeah. Warring States period, Sengoku period, that's the same thing. You've probably heard us mention that a lot in previous episodes. And that Onin War, you might recall if you listened to the episode we did recently about the Golden and Silver Pavilions, the start of that war was mostly due to weak leadership by Ashikaga Yoshimasa. He was that really artistic but not very politically minded shogun. He was the guy that helped shape that Higashiyama culture. This is episode 146 if you want to hear more about that. I thought that was interesting just seeing how exactly that started, how things devolved really quickly there.
Yeah, I think we were poking fun of him for sitting in his pavilion making art while the city just burned around him.
Yep, pretty
and he
much.
did nothing.
Yeah. So the Sengoku period, we're talking 150 years of chaos. It was not a good time.
No.
So this is another part where we have some overlapping periods. The Sengoku period started in the Muromachi period, but then it continued into the next one. We're talking about the Azuchi-Momoyama period, which is from 1568 to 1600. So this is the Sengoku period comes to an end in this period, and it's probably the most popular, most famous part of Japanese history, would you say? Is that fair, Paul? I'm just thinking about all the movies and the books and the video games. I feel like if you're looking at some piece of media about Japanese history, there's a 60% chance that it's about this period.
Yeah, I'd agree. If you're talking about Japanese history, this is such an interesting and important period. I think if you're talking about Japanese culture, maybe Edo period slightly more.
Sure. Yeah, that's fair. But like if you watched the Shogun TV show that came out not long ago, or you read the book that the show was based on, that's set in this period. The latest Assassin's Creed video game, Assassin's Creed Shadows, which I'm playing right now, that takes place in this period. Sekiro takes place here too. It's just really popular because there's so much that happened really quickly that just totally transformed Japanese culture. Country was finally unified after that 150 years of war, and there are some very interesting, very famous characters who led Japan into its subsequent period of isolation.
Yeah. I mean, this period, at the beginning at least, is all about Oda Nobunaga, one of the three great unifiers, one of the huge characters of Japanese history. This period actually begins in 1568 when Nobunaga seized Kyoto.
Yeah, he took power from the Ashikaga shogunate. You know, during this Sengoku period, the shogunate was still technically in charge, but they had kind of totally lost control of things, basically.
Yeah. Nobunaga was the daimyo of a rather small domain, but he was shrewd and strategic and ruthless and slowly consolidated his power and ended up taking over a large chunk of Japan. And he was only stopped when he was betrayed and killed by one of his subordinates.
Yeah, a general, Akechi Mitsuhide. That was in 1582.
So, like, what was his plan? You know,
What do you mean?
What do you think? I'm just going to kill Nobunaga and, like, everyone's going to flock to me? Or what do you think was going to happen when he did that? Like, everyone was mad.
Yeah,
right?
he clearly didn't plan it out very well
Yeah.
after that, because he only got 13 days
Man.
That's how long he was in power after Nobunaga was dead.
So this leads to the next great figure of the era.
Oh, sorry, can I interject one more little detail here?
Sure.
Just for people that watched the Shogun TV show, Akechi Mitsuhide, that's Mariko's dad. Like, that's why she was so, dishonored. She was talking about how her family they lost all their honor because her dad had betrayed Nobunaga.
Okay. Yeah, I believe that. So after Nobunaga, one of his top generals, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, avenged his death and became the new power in Japan. He was actually an interesting guy because he started out as a peasant servant to Nobunaga. But Nobunaga was one of those guys that promoted based on talent rather than family heritage and allowed Toyotomi to rise up.
It's quite a life, man.
Yeah. So he kept working and eventually basically reunited almost all of Japan under his banners.
But then he died.
Well, he started a war with Korea first.
Yeah, he did that.
I think there are theories that he was power hungry and wanted to be emperor of the world. Other people I've seen suggest that he had all these samurai that had been fighting for 150 years and they couldn't just immediately flip to peace. So he created an outside enemy so they'd stop fighting each other. Maybe that's a little nicer view of him in history.
Maybe he was just a genius instead of power
then
hungry.
he died with a very young heir and entrusted some of his retainers to watch over him, but that didn't last very long.
Yeah. I don't know. It's kind of crazy to me that he died of natural causes. Like, with such a big character and such a important role in Japanese history, you'd think he went out in some spectacular fashion, but no, just natural causes.
Yep.
And that's right around when that Shogun TV show starts, by the way. It's like right after he died.
Oh, okay.
So after he died, there was supposed to be, and people that have watched the show are going to recognize this part of the story, there was a council that was supposed to take care of things until his son Hideyori was old enough to rule. But of course, power struggles broke out, as they always seem to do when there's a underage ruler.
Yep.
So factions formed. There was a big war, and ultimately Tokugawa Ieyasu, the third of the great unifiers, ended up taking power after he won the pivotal Battle of Sekigahara in 1600. If I can gloss over it all that quickly,
we've been there.
Too quick? Yeah, Paul and I went to Sekigahara on our last trip and saw the battlefield, and it was awesome.
Yeah.
If you're into history, you should totally go there.
And I do think that's fair. It took about 2 years, and he won that battle of consolidated power.
And that battle is what ended the Azuchi-Momoyama period.
And began the Edo period. So in the year 1600 is what we consider the beginning of the Edo period. And Tokugawa created a new shogunate, and they really began the isolation again. That's where they really pulled back. They really started controlling everyone in the country, strict laws, strict regulations on who could travel and trade, and banned most foreign trade, except from Korea and China.
Yeah, they made a lot of changes to try to solidify their power, make sure that no one was going to rebel again.
And it worked. I mean, they had 150 years of nonstop war, flipping into basically 250 years of like almost continual peace.
Yeah. And they kind of restructured Japanese society in a lot of ways to make that happen. They imposed a strict class hierarchy. They banned Christianity. They started, that isolationist period you mentioned, Paul. You know, I had always thought that it was Ieyasu himself who kind of started that isolationist period, but I was surprised that he actually encouraged foreign trade. It was not until his grandson, Iemitsu, took power in the 1630s that isolationist period started.
Yeah.
Also, if I can back up just a little bit, tell me if I'm going too deep into the details, but another thing I thought was interesting was that right after the Battle of Sekigahara, Ieyasu didn't immediately gain the title of shogun. It took a while because he wanted to make sure that he solidified his power and control first, make sure that no one could threaten the stability of this new government he wanted to form. So it wasn't until 1603 that he had the emperor grant him that title of shogun. And that's why sometimes you'll see the Edo period listed as starting at the year 1600, because that's the Battle of Sekigahara. Some historians say that it doesn't start until 1603, because that's when he got the official title of shogun.
Sure.
Just thought that was interesting.
Yep.
Ieyasu also moved the capital from Kyoto to Edo, which is now Tokyo. So Kyoto had been the capital for so long.
That's certainly a change that's had modern day ramifications.
Definitely.
To think that Tokyo was a relatively small settlement in 1600 to what it is today, that's wild.
Yeah, he was responsible for that. I mean, the beginning of that anyway. He set it on its course to become what it is today. He also, just that peace and prosperity that he established enabled the flourishing of so many things that we associate with traditional Japan. Like, Paul, you mentioned, if you're thinking about, Japanese cultural history, you're probably going to think about the Edo period. The sumo wrestling, the geisha culture, kabuki theater, ukiyo-e prints, garden design, all that stuff flourished in the Edo period because of the peace and prosperity that Ieyasu ushered in.
Yeah, and even some of the older arts really kind of solidified into the styles that they are today. Everything kind of got codified in a way.
Yeah, I remember even early on when we first started the podcast, that was kind of the first way I started to conceptualize the Edo period is that's when everything kind of crystallized into these, the modern form of these traditional arts.
The population and economy also boomed during this time due to some agricultural changes, plus just a better handling of the economy as a whole. Well, eventually the isolationism became difficult, and in 1853, the Americans came knocking on the door. A group of American ships commanded by Mr. Commodore Matthew Perry.
I will always imagine Chandler's face in an old-timey, military uniform.
Sure. They basically showed up with big ships with big guns and demanded access to Japan, and the Tokugawa government had nothing to fight them with. They just couldn't do anything. And this did lead to Japan opening up some ports for foreign trade and signing what they called unequal treaties with the Western powers. Basically, they had to sign whatever was put in front of them. This really undermined the power of the Tokugawa shogunate. People were like, these guys can't even stand up for us or run the country correctly. They're just getting pushed around. And that was kind of the beginning of the end.
Yep. And then people started hearing about all this technology and modernization that had been going on in the rest of the world while the shogunate was kind of putting their fingers in their ears and not paying attention to anything. So, yeah, people just started thinking, you know what, this shogunate, they're too old-fashioned. Japan as a country needs to catch up to the rest of the world. So that push for modernization eventually led to the Meiji Restoration, which is the next era on our list.
Mm-hmm.
So you've probably heard us mention the Meiji Restoration before on the podcast. 1868, that's when imperial rule was restored, and the Tokugawa shogunate, which ended up being the final shogunate so far, ended. And there was, of course, a big war that made that happen. That's known as the Boshin War.
So it's interesting. The emperor was returned to power, but the emperor was, I think, 15 at this time. So really the samurai that helped fight the war were the ones that kind of seized power. Although as the emperor grew, he did grow into his role and take on a lot of responsibility within the government.
Are you thinking like it could have very easily just become a new shogunate? Because like it was a military takeover, and then they had this young emperor that they're using to legitimize their power.
Yeah, I think they probably rallied around the emperor just because they didn't like the shogun. You know, I don't think it was necessarily because they thought that the emperor is the true ruler of Japan.
Well, but they put him in power. Like they
did.
They didn't take the power for themselves, which is, it's just interesting that they did
They
that
somewhat did. I think part of this is the emperor was a fairly extraordinary guy. Like he was actually a really good leader. So as he grew, he kind of demanded some power for himself through his competence and just through who he was. But this led to massive modernization.
Oh, yeah.
They dove in. They brought in science and all sorts of instructors from the West. One of the big things they did that really helped is that they brought in experts from the West to come teach them how do you build a railroad, how do you manufacture things, and their economy started booming and industrializing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so technology was modernizing, but they also modernized kind of the societal structure as well, right? They dissolved the samurai class, for example. They introduced that prefectural system that we now use. Universal education became a thing. They created a Western-style army and navy. Like they kind of remodeled a lot of stuff based on the Western world.
This was also the rise of nationalism and imperialism.
Yeah, you know, Japan looked around the world and they noticed that while the shogunate, like I said, they were putting their fingers in their ears and not paying attention, there were certain other countries that were tromping all over the world, conquering places and colonizing places and being all imperialist. So Japan is like, hey, you know, we should do that too, maybe. If we want to be a world power, let's go start conquering places. So they started expanding their empire.
The military ended up launching an expedition to Taiwan against the government's official wishes, which was the first time that the military had done that, just acted on their own and started a fight, which would happen again, quite famously. In 1894 through 1895, Japan fought the First Sino-Japanese War. They actually fought the Chinese in Korea and ended up winning that war. And then in 1904, 1905, they fought Russia as well and won that war too, which shocked the Western world that an Asian country beat a European country.
So they managed to take over China and Russia, huh?
Not quite. They took over Korea and some areas around Korea. So the army and a lot of nationalists were really pushing for this expansion, but the emperor was involved too. And he was very much on board with these wars and the expansion.
So that Meiji period was a relatively short one. That one's usually considered to be from 1868 to 1912. In 1912, this is another short one actually, the Taisho period is from 1912 to 1926. This period saw a shift toward a more representational government, which apparently had something to do with the fact that the Taisho emperor was a bit sickly and weak, so that created room for the imperial diet to gain influence. And that's kind of a funny term. I always thought that was kind of funny, the imperial diet.
I know.
We're not talking about what the emperor was eating. The diet is just what they called Japan's legislature. So political parties started popping up too in this period and started gaining more influence. So there's a bit of a political shift, you could say.
Yeah, it was definitely a plus for democracy during this time.
At the same time, the modernization continued, which led to increased urbanization, more people moving into the big cities, and that helped create a middle class. And these people in the middle class wanted to be more involved in politics, and over time, more and more people gained the right to vote. For example, in 1925, the government granted universal male suffrage for those over age 25. Before that, it was just like rich dudes, basically, who could vote. That old story. But even after 1925, women still couldn't vote yet. That was too progressive for them.
Okay. They made some progress there.
Yep.
Japan did participate in World War I on the side of the Allies and actually took some Pacific colonies from Germany.
Yeah, it's pretty prophetic that they were already calling it World War I, huh?
The Great War at the time, I believe. And that also helped their economy continue to boom for all the wartime stuff. And then in September of 1923, the Great Kanto earthquake struck and ravaged Tokyo. The earthquake and the fires that resulted from it left over 100,000 dead and destroyed the homes of about 3 million people.
It's massive.
That's unbelievable disaster.
Yeah. The next period, in 1926, the Showa period began. This is kind of a long one. This is like most of the middle of the 1900s. Showa period is 1926 to 1989. So, of course, tons of stuff happened. Oh, there's just so much.
This period is wild.
Yeah, it's almost weird that it's even...
It's like three different periods all in one just because it was the same emperor.
Right. Remember, at this point, this is when they started naming the periods after... Or not naming the periods after the emperor, more like naming the emperor after the period. But, one period per emperor is basically how it worked at this point.
This was a 63-year reign, the longest in Japanese history for an emperor.
Wow. That is long.
It is.
So at the beginning of the Showa period, Japan was, of course, still picking fights all over the place. They wanted to spread their empire, and basically they tried to take over as much of Asia as they could. Right, Paul?
Yep. This is where the army went off the rails again, and a group of army officers in Manchuria guarding a railroad staged a fake bombing and blamed the Chinese and declared war and took over Manchuria without the government being involved at all. They just did it. And they were like, hey, guys, we took over Manchuria. That's wild that the army would just do that.
Yeah.
There were also a number of more moderate politicians that were assassinated by radical nationalists during this time, which really helped push the imperialism forward as there was no one left to stand in their way. And all that leads into World War II, right?
Oh, yeah, that happened. That didn't go particularly well for Japan, as I recall.
It kind of didn't, and then it did, and then it didn't. So
the end of it, anyway.
Yeah, 1937, they invaded China. They had some initial success, but they couldn't finish the job. They ended up just getting bogged down in a really bloody war there. The U.S. and other Western nations put harsher and harsher sanctions on Japan, especially after they invaded French Indochina, modern-day Vietnam. We froze all of their assets that we had our hands on. And that's part of what I think led Japan to decide to attack America in the attacks on Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, which officially brought America into the war. And even after that, Japan won a number of battles after that for the next year or so, but they lost a massive naval battle at the Battle of Midway, and it was kind of all just downhill from there. During the war, life in Japan became more and more difficult, especially after the U.S. started bombing all their cities in 1944. That's why so many of these places and cities we talk about, like, oh, the city got burned down in World War II, and so many things had to be rebuilt.
We have said that a lot, haven't we?
Yeah, really just sad. So many people lost their lives. Eventually, in 1945, Japan did surrender after a couple of atomic bombs were dropped and the Russians joined the war. And that was the end of the war. Complete surrender.
Yep. So like I said, even though the Showa period spans most of the mid-1900s, you can almost think of it as two periods. There's like the pre-war era of imperial expansion and then the post-war period of economic recovery. And that economic recovery was dramatic, to say the least. I mean, Japan just changed and rebuilt so quickly. It changed in so many ways. Like they got a new constitution closely modeled after America's. Because, by the way, the United States occupied Japan after the war until 1952. So in this new government, the emperor took a backseat to a new democratic government.
Who the emperor got let off the hook, by the way.
For all the imperialism stuff?
Yeah, the Americans made him declare that he wasn't like a god, but then they let him continue. A lot of people got charged with war crimes and whatnot, but not the emperor.
Okay. I think it's the first time we mentioned the emperor being connected to the gods. We should say that whole imperial line that we talked about going, way, way, way back, supposedly those first emperors were descended from the sun goddess Amaterasu.
Yes.
So that's where that comes from. But yeah, so Japan basically shifted their attention from imperial conquest to economic development. And I saw their economic growth described with words like tremendous, spectacular. Apparently, I hadn't heard this, but it's also known, like, I don't know, semi-officially or something, as the Japanese economic miracle. That's what they call it. Like, there's a Wikipedia article called that.
Yeah.
And they eventually managed to become the second largest economy in the world after the United States.
And that was by 1968, the second largest in the world. That's fairly quick.
Yeah.
The economy continued to boom into the 80s. By the end of 1987, the Tokyo Stock Exchange was the largest in the world.
Well, yeah, but that's also when they were getting into what's now known as the bubble economy, where things were extremely overvalued, right?
Yes. Times were good, or so they thought. The post-war period was also when Japanese culture started getting proliferated to the rest of the world. U.S. troops in particular would bring back pieces of Japanese culture with them, such as martial arts that became popular in the United States. It was also the dawn of anime, manga, eventually video games that all would go on to have worldwide cultural impact.
So in 1989, the Heisei Period began. That lasted until 2019. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this Heisei period, Japan was in the middle of that bubble economy. People had gotten a little too excited about all that economic development. Real estate and stock market prices had become hugely inflated, and that bubble burst in 1992, leading into what's known as the lost decade, where the economy was in constant decline. Pretty scary. It was kind of a dark period in Japan for other reasons, too. In 1995 was the hugely destructive Kobe earthquake. That same year, there was that sarin gas attack in Tokyo, which a lot of people point to as the reason that it's impossible to find trash cans in Japan now. Because the gas attack, like they put things in trash cans.
Did they?
Isn't that where it came from? They detonated the
I remember them like
gas
throwing
bombs.
them on the floor in trains and like poking holes in the bags with their umbrellas. They may have put some in trash cans too. I don't remember.
I might be misremembering that.
Okay.
I'm probably misremembering. Forget that part.
Okay.
I didn't say that.
Japan hit its peak population in 2008 at about 128 million.
Oh, wow.
And it's been declining since with the low birth rates.
In 2011, of course, there was that earthquake and tsunami that devastated coastal Tohoku.
2011 was also the year the Tokyo Skytree opened.
Yeah.
The tallest tower in the world, but not tallest building.
Yeah. On the more positive side, Paul, you mentioned that the Japanese pop culture being exported to the rest of the world started in the 80s, but this is really when it got just insanely huge, right?
Yeah, right. I remember like 2005 even, it was like I was kind of a nerd for being into all that stuff. And by 2019, it was like super normal to be into anime and video games and all that.
Yeah. And I feel like now every shopping mall is like really leaning into Japanese stuff.
Right. There's
Every-
20 stores in a mall. Like 3 of them are like Japanese things you can buy, and another 4 of them are boba shops.
Yeah. I mean, in the Mall of America, they have this whole corner that's just like all Japanese stuff. They got the Japanese conveyor belt sushi place. They got the Ebisu store. They got, like you said, boba. They got Little Tokyo at the food court and stuff.
Yeah. I'm not complaining
Anyway.
either.
Yeah, no. They're trying to revitalize Burnsville Center here with like a whole Asian cornerstone. What do they call that?
Is that ever going to open up? I feel like they've been building that for 3 years.
I know. I've been watching it, and it looks cool in there, but still no indication of when it's going to open.
Okay.
Anyway. Also, in the Heisei period, Paul, I should mention that this is the era when Jason Nealing first visited Japan and started talking with his friend Paul Chan about starting a podcast called Sightseeing Japan, which would go on to reverberate through the world of Japanese tourism for years to come. Did you know that?
Yeah, my first 2 trips were in this period, huh? That's a great note. Very important
pretty
note
exciting.
in Japan's history.
Very influential.
Are you ready for Reiwa period?
The last one, the current one, the one that we're living in right now.
Yeah, this would begin in 2019, and the emperor actually retired or abdicated rather than passed away to begin this era.
Yep, and at the very beginning of the Reiwa period, Sightseeing Japan podcast launched, and Japan's tourism industry was accelerating, and historians are still in debate over whether there was a causal connection between those two events.
Are we the reason of peak tourism now? Or are we just riding the wave?
We might need to wait a few decades for the historians to figure that one out. But
we'll see what happens in like 10 years when we stop the podcast.
Yeah, right. But in 2020, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic rocked the world. I think most of our listeners probably remember that.
Yeah. The Tokyo Olympics got delayed a year to 2021.
Yep.
Paul famously said, it won't be a problem. They'll still have the Olympics. And then it like got delayed immediately after we released that episode, I think.
I think he also famously said, you know, Japan, and they like that butt stuff. Something like that.
Wait, hold on. When did I say that?
Something like that. It was definitely in there.
Okay. All right. I forgot about that one. In 2022, former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was assassinated. That was quite the story. He was killed with a made-at-home firearm.
Mm-hmm.
There's like 1 or 2 gun deaths a year in Japan. So that was incredible story. Yeah, it really shocked the Japanese public.
Yep. International interest in visiting Japan did not really wane over the pandemic. It reopened to tourism in 2022, and international tourism bounced back very quickly and even rose above pre-pandemic levels by 2024. Paul, you know how many international visitors they had last year?
27 million.
37 million.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
Hey, I was not close, but not too far off for pulling a number out of my butt, should I say?
Oh, Paul's into butt stuff too, huh?
Hey, whoa.
You set me up. That was intentional. I know it.
All right, I got one more note. Recently, Japan has committed to spending 2% of their GDP on defense spending, changing course from since World War II, when they basically have had hardly any military. Things are changing. The world's shifting. And Japan is close, maybe, to getting rid of that provision in its constitution, preventing them from having an army.
So, I mean, what do you have a direct comparison? Like, how much were they spending before that? Because they have their defense forces.
Yes, they do have the self-defense force. I don't know the number before, but I saw that if they do reach that 2% number that they're planning to by 2027, that would make them the 3rd largest spender in the world behind the U.S. and China.
Wow.
I mean, that's just how big their economy is.
Well, when you put it that way, it sounds like a much bigger deal.
2% is fairly hefty.
Yeah.
For defense spending. So I think the worries are China, North Korea, and Russia. They want to be able to
Yeah, that makes
protect
sense.
themselves.
Yeah.
So we'll see what history holds in the next few hundred years.
Yeah. Kind of a bummer to have to be living through it sometimes.
Yeah, but looking back on all of this history, there aren't that many great periods where it'd be like, oh yeah, this would be a good time to live.
That's
There was
true.
always something going on.
That's true. I guess it's easy sometimes to look back at like the last, I don't know, 50 years and be like, man, things were so much better before I was around.
Right. It's like the early mid Edo period and maybe the last 70, 80 years are probably the best times I can think of to like be alive in Japan.
Yeah. I find it a little reassuring sometimes looking back at certain periods in history and just realizing how quickly things can change sometimes.
Oh yeah.
Think about like Japan at the end of the war and then, quickly becoming the second biggest economy in the world.
Yeah.
And like you were talking about the nationalist extremists, and then like later in that period, they had socialist extremists, right? So
Mhm.
it's like things can really swing from one side to the other pretty quickly, and that gives me hope.
Yeah. So that's it, I think, right? That's all we had for the history.
That's history. That's all of it. That's the history
was-
of Japan, every single detail of it.
It was incredibly difficult to synthesize that down.
I hope that made sense. I
But-
hope that helps people understand, the
Yeah.
context of all the other episodes we.
I think there was a lot of good stuff in there, but there's obviously more to dive into. I think the hardest part for me, though, was not stopping and commenting on everything. Like, I love history and I want to make the connections, and I just like, we gotta just get through this.
I could see you. I could see the internal battle. I see you trying to hold back. What can I say?
It was happening.
Yeah.
But I think that was great. I'm really happy. That was a challenge, but I'm really happy we finally did that.
Yeah, me too. That was fun.
And for 150, why not? 150!
Seems like a good time for
Congratulations, us.
it. Congratulations to us.
Anyone out there that's listened to all 150, congratulations. Huge pat on the back.
You made
That's unbelievable. There's got to be someone out there, right?
Yeah. And thank you for joining us.
So that's the end of the season, but we've made a commitment to come back quicker this time.
Yeah, and I think this will be good. It'll keep us focused. We're going to come back in 8 weeks. So really, when you think about it, it's just like 3 episodes worth of time that we're going to be gone, Season 7 is going to start on October 6th, 2025. And in the meantime, during that break, we're not just going to be sitting around sipping Mai Tais. We're going to be working on more content for our patrons. We're also going to be running a poll for our patrons where they can decide one of the episode topics for next season.
Yep.
So be on the lookout for that posting on Patreon. Our Shogun and Emperor level patrons are going to be able to submit suggestions, and then they and the Daimyo level patrons will all be able to vote. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that turns out. That's always fun, just to see what people come up with and see which ones pull ahead.
Right. It's like nerve-wracking, but also exciting to have one outside of our control. It's just like, we'll see what we get here,
Yeah.
We'll also, once we come up with our full episode list, we will release that to our patrons before the season starts.
Yep.
If you're interested in that. Maybe write another itinerary?
We'll see.
We haven't fully committed on that.
Yeah,
but
haven't
that's
discussed
possible
it
as
yet.
well.
I definitely want to do some more cooking videos.
Yes. Yeah, me too.
And I think I have some ideas for fun Patreon exclusive audio episodes we could do too.
Yes. We'll be doing some stuff.
Yep. Well, before we head out, we should thank Shogun level patrons: Kevin Harris, Michael Morris, Brady K, Jack, Pamela Arola, Kevin Phillips, Kelly Ardong, Georgette and Caitlin Seymour. Thank you all so much. Also want to call out our Emperor level patrons, John from Tucson and our other mysterious anonymous Emperor level patron. Thank you guys so much.
Mysterious and anonymous. Thank you all, sincerely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Anything else, Paul? Is that good?
If you're missing us in the 8 weeks, check out Instagram.
We'll be around.
Check out the Patreon. There'll be some stuff happening.
Yep. Send us
Or
an email.
go on our Discord.
Yep, you could do that. there are a bunch of ways to find us while we're taking a little break.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next season.